Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back. Welcome back to 360 OS. I hope you've all had a good session of the 5 Cs. Did you manage to find cheesecake? Was there cheesecake in the end? Or have we been deceived? Disinformation. Was there something other than cheesecake? Pancakes. There we go. CCCPC. Almost works. One of the big things about DFR Lab is that we try and bring people together. We try and bring expertise together. We try and bring knowledge together. One of the great ways of doing that is putting people together in a room with pancakes. But there are many ways of doing this. One of the initiatives that we're particularly proud of at the Atlantic Council is the Disinfo portal. This is another way of bringing together all the expertise you could want online. So it's a great pleasure to introduce and to ask up to the podium to talk about the Disinfo portal Ambassador Dan Fried, who's a distinguished fellow at the Atlantic Council, and Geisha Gonzalez, who's the Associate Director of the Eurasia Center at the Atlantic Council. Dan, Geisha, thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you, Ben. And I'll take this one. I'm very sorry for the back of my head. Ambassador Fried.
Geisha.
Pleasure to be here. Thank you so much to Ben and to our colleagues at the DFR Lab for hosting us to talk about our disinformation portal. One of the key words that we've heard today is coordination, coordination, coordination. And this is exactly what the portal is meant to do. So with that, I will, and the sound is not there. But take a look. The video's playing.
And I guess we'll call it a day and just go to the bar.
We're waiting for the sound.
You can also see it online.
Okay, while we're waiting for the techies to fix it, I have a question. How many of you here are from what used to be called the Soviet bloc or the Soviet Union? You know, the old East. Okay. Then you all at least need no old American to tell you about Russian disinformation. You know, you grew up, well, you didn't grow up with it, you're too young, but it's family stories. And if any of you are from Russia still or Eurasia, then you know what I'm talking about. Should we start while we're waiting for the...
Yeah, well, it's ready, I think.
Okay.
Okay.
To be continued.
There we
now
go.
The film.
Great.
So, Disinfo Lab is a great tool. It is one of the heroes in the effort to counter Russian disinformation. All of the actors in Europe and Eurasia, the digital Sherlocks, the bot hunters, are the ultimate answer to the problem of Russian disinformation. I'm old. I'm going to start with the historical analogy. Okay? Every major information revolution has had good side and bad side. The printing press, it's the Gutenberg Bible. Known. Not so known are the inflammatory and hysterical disinformation tracts that were published, disseminated, and caused witch hunts, riots, and led to the religious wars. It took Europe a long time for society to catch up to and develop resistance to inflammatory texts. Same thing, 19th century daily newspapers, yellow journalism. Same thing, radio and television, radio in the hands of Hitler. You know, cutting edge tool to serve reactionary purposes. So you see where I'm going, perfectly obvious. The digital space is the new printing press, and it will take societies, free and those under various yokes, a certain number of years to catch up to it. Societies develop antibodies to the outside infection of disinformation. Now, I know I've sort of by analogy explained that Russian disinformation is a germ, and I'm crude, and I'm sorry about that. But the answer is to bring together networks of people like yourselves, the activists around the world, who can expose this disinformation. It is activists and actors in free societies, or free actors in non-free societies, who are the solution to the problem. Governments can do something with regulatory frameworks to force transparency, and social media companies, God knows, have a responsibility not to let their platforms be exploited too easily. But the answer is the free activists. And the Disinfo portal is supposed to be a tool to connect people. It is the equivalent, and those of us in the United States, Western Europe, Central Europe, trying to help this issue are grasping for tools now which can perform the same function as the tools in my day. Radio Free Europe, ancient history, designed to bring together networks of free people when they could not act in their own countries. Completely different tool, the Disinfo portal and similar tools that are springing up are the way to fix this problem, okay? That's what this is about. I put it into context, but you don't want to hear me. You want better to hear from Geisha, and then I want to hear from you.
Well, thank you so much. But that is really what it is. So what is Disinformation Portal? It's an aggregator of all existing efforts in Europe and in the US, bringing together all the experts that are working on the issues of disinformation. The network currently has 27 initiatives that are working in this space. But during our research, we found that there's actually 167 initiatives working on disinformation in Europe and the US alone. So really trying to bring all of that knowledge together in one place is what the portal aims to achieve. It is an open site, so you go to disinfoportal.org and you find all of this. We have currently 120 experts that are working on 33 countries, speak 22 languages, and are working exclusively in Europe and the US, tracking Kremlin tactics around Europe. You can sort the experts, so you can find them by language, expertise, countries that they cover. You can find their information, see the languages, expertise, their bio. You can contact them. Directly through this site, you can send them a note. You have questions, it goes directly into their inbox. I don't guarantee that they will respond because, well, we all have inboxes that are filling up with emails at the moment. But it goes directly into their inbox. We have country profiles. Goes in depth on each of the countries. It aggregates reports on the countries, recent stories, videos, and the experts working on the issue. It also had spotlight videos that are short explainers covering the area throughout, reports. And essentially, what we found, why we created the Disinformation Portal, was because we sat across a lot of these conferences where we talk about networking and coordinating, and if only we work together, we can actually achieve something. And a lot of the knowledge that is on disinformation has already been out there for a really long time. This is just the beginning. Of course, we understand that the Kremlin is not the only malign actor that is using these tools. Of course, they developed them, they finessed them, they perfected them, but now state and non-state actors across the world are using these tools to destabilize, influence, and to really undermine democratic institutions across the world. And so the beginning is this, bringing together the disinformation community, the community working on disinformation across Europe and in the US, and hopefully expand. So that will be our next step. We want to start translating content from some of our partners that are working exclusively in their native languages. We want to expand to cover experts that are working on China, Iran, and really develop the network into something bigger. This really was meant to be a tool for policymakers and journalists, because there isn't a place where you can go currently if you want to know what's happening in Armenia. But there's a great organization called Myth Detector in Georgia that actually works on Armenia and Azerbaijan. And so knowing that there is a place where you could just search, find the information, and use it however it's most useful to you is what the goal of the disinformation portal is.
The Kremlin specialized in the Soviet period in isolating the dissidents, in atomizing them. They were all alone. When they reached out and found that they were part of a wider community, it gave them strength. The formula is the same. The tactics are radically different. You don't want somebody of my generation running this. God knows, the last guy. You want somebody, Geisha's generation, and the generation of most of the people here. This tool is supposed to bring your networks together. And when Kremlin disinformation is exposed, it gives people better tools to fight it. Kremlin has perfected it. They're cutting edge. They won't be the only people. The tools we develop and the habits of transparency and interconnectedness will serve all of our communities well in the future. We've talked a lot.
Yeah.
We get to hear from them.
Yeah.
Questions?
Are there any questions?
Yes.
Okay.
No question.
All right, so we have 2 questions there. We'll take the in-person first.
Thank you. Andras Stratt from Hungary. Just one very short question. I mean, tracking Russian disinformation is one thing, but if we just keep tracking, it means that we stay reactive. Is there any way to forecast what Russia is going to do next time? So to move from reactiveness to proactiveness? Thank you.
Of course. I'm happy to take that. One of the reasons why we remain reactive is that we, in different countries, continue to start at the same point, which is trying to admire the problem and understand what is happening. But this, bringing together all the research that's been done, is meant so that you don't start at the exploration phase, but that you rather use the knowledge that is there so that you can move forward and therefore become more proactive. But if we all start in step 1, every time that there's an attack, it's inevitable. And so the site is really meant to put together what's already been studied in hopes that people can move forward.
I see a question.
Yeah?
Are you facilitating best practice exchange across the network? If so, how? And the answer to that is partly an answer to your question. I don't think it's terribly hard to guess what some of the Kremlin's next moves will be, if you think about it. If there is in any country that's on the Kremlin target list a particular social issue, you better believe that the troll farm, the St. Petersburg troll farm, is going to be right in that space. Okay. Anybody here from Poland? Okay, well, I will bet dollars to rubles, okay, that the Russians are playing both sides of Polish-German, Polish-Ukrainian, Polish-Lithuanian, Polish-Jewish issues. And the reason I'm confident is because we know they're doing it in the American space, okay, playing both sides of our nativist issues, both roles. You get to play both sides. You get to attack each other in completely phony, manufactured conversations, and that needs to be exposed. And once exposed, it is neutral. It can be neutralized. The French were actually successful, more so than the Americans. When the Russian hack of the Macron campaign was exposed, the story in France became the Russian hack, not what was hacked. The French learned from the American failure and succeeded. Good for them. It was a great job, and it shows that this can work. That's sort of the answer to the question about best practices is Yeah, the French example, we are advertising examples like that, and there will be more.
Yeah, and on an operational level, we have a transatlantic forum that exists on Slack, which is experts only, Shenton House rules. So we do prompt folks there. Of course, we have the Google groups and the Facebook groups, and then we have a team that is actually emailing the network every 2 weeks to remind them that we're there, that we exist, and then we promote all their materials. And what has occurred is that now, before a publication gets launched, we get the email, we're able to help prep and push it through. How can an expert be listed on Disinfo Portal? Send us a note at contact@disinfoportal.org, and we'll verify you. Let's see, based on the data collected, if any, so far, what type of content is most effective at getting across the echo chambers and partisan lines? It seems to be the videos are the key ones that are looking at the issue not on a Kremlin lens, but rather as a illness of democracy that we're dealing with. And so that has been the most effective content that we've had. In terms of what we received from our partners is ways to cooperate. So they continue to send us things that talk more about the transatlantic piece of it than the Kremlin aggression.
Was there a question about who's funding it? I thought I saw it and it disappeared.
Oh, who's funding it? Not a government.
Right.
It's a private foundation.
Right. And, I wish social media companies would pitch in, sort of.
It would be great, right? So, yes.
Yes.
Thank you. I'm Mike Flood from Critical Information in the United Kingdom, just a citizens' initiative. I've been logging initiatives around the world for the last year. I have 335.
Let's
I have
compare
90
notes.
in the UK. My problem is I don't know which are the real ones, which are the serious players.
Yeah.
Could we have an organogram of which are the serious players doing what things? I mean, I've divided them up into 12 different categories, but it's very difficult to know which are the serious ones.
Yeah.
And this is yet another portal, which is
Yeah.
it is great, but
Yeah. No, of course. We're trying to-
organogram would be really helpful.
Yeah, so what we did was I started compiling a list, and I asked my friends in Europe, the people that I know that are serious in this space, that are really deep in, to pitch in. We narrowed it down to 167 initiatives that are working on disinformation across the US and Europe, and they're all verified. But there are some that don't want to be listed because the work that they do is so sensitive, because they do get attacked. Immediately after the portal launched, we had a series of trolls, and some of our partners were targeted because of it. And so, I'm happy to share the list for anybody that wants to see what we've compiled so far. It's not like top secret. It's just not a part of the portal at the moment, because we really do want it to be partnership means content. Means networks that people can see, reach out to, and really engage with. And so, but 300 is quite a bit. That is also part of the problem, that we have so many different initiatives because nobody knows what is out there and who's addressing the problem. So when we woke up to see that this was a challenge, everybody's trying to find, like, where do we get good information and create these initiatives. I know that we're out of time, so if you have any questions, I'm around, or you can reach out to us at contact@disinfoportal.org. Thank you, Ambassador Fried.
Last thought. Look, this is not an optimistic period for democracy and freedom, because the authoritarians and the demagogues think they're winning. We're in a rough cycle right now. I mean, y'all know it, so I might as well say it. We've been here before. We will succeed. If I could go back in a time machine to the 1930s, I would say to the liberals, the pro-democracy people, fascism and Stalinism is not actually the wave of the future. Have faith in yourselves and in your principles. And I say the same thing to you now. The ideals that brought you here will prevail. They are the right ones. But a lot of damage can be done in the reactionary cycles. And I don't mean to discount that problem. But we've been here before. We will succeed. All right.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone. Thank you, Ambassador Fried. Sorry.
Ambassador and Geisha, thank you very much. Ladies and gentlemen, we've been talking a lot about elections this morning. Permit me to ramble for a minute while we set the stage. Two things about elections which really spring to mind for me, both as a former journalist and as a researcher now. The first thing is that elections don't stop. If you think about the elections we've had in the last few years, just think about the ones with democratic shocks. We've had the United States, we've had Brexit, we had the attack in France, we had Germany, we've got Mexico coming up next weekend, we've got Sweden in Sweden in September, we've got Latvia and Brazil in October, we've got the midterms in November, and then next year it's South Africa and India. Elections don't stop. The second point is that elections are a sitting target for interference. For me, the most interesting thing about the Mueller indictment into the Russian operation against the US was when it started. That operation was launched in April 2014 to target an election that they already knew was going to be in November 2016. It's a sitting target which has been flagged up in advance. So to talk about the threat to elections, which is the threat to democracy, it's my great pleasure to introduce Alejandro Romero, who is the founder and CEO of Alto Data Analytics, to introduce René de Rester, who is a lead researcher at Data for Democracy, and to introduce Carl Bildt, who is a man who has had many titles and many jobs, but there is only one way to define him, and that is as Carl Bildt. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much.
Thanks very much. And you said that I've had very many jobs, but among the things I've done, I have, as a matter of fact, done election campaigns. And I think I've done elections for, embarrassing to say, but half a century or something like that. X numbers of them in my own country, been devising election campaigns, planning election campaigns, conducting election campaigns, losing them, and winning some of them. And then doing that also in other countries that I've been involved in, either when I've been sort of engaged in trying to promote democracy in other parts of Europe, which has been spectacularly successful, by the way, and trying to set up in complicated countries after wars and after conflicts some sort of political arrangements that would make it possible for those peoples to devise their own futures. Elections are extremely important. Democracy is a rule of government. I think it was Winston Churchill who said it's absolutely the worst way of running a country, except for the other alternatives that are even worse. But what is the key defining feature of democracy is not that the people are deciding everything. That's a myth. They are not. But the people have the possibility to throw out the rascals when they misbehave. It is a way for societies to correct major mistakes of governance. And that is the feature of democracies that make them, over time, much more survivable, much more resilient than even the strongest dictatorship can ever be. Because dictatorships, when they are strong, they don't have the ability to self-correct. And accordingly, even a strong dictatorship is a very brittle sort of governance. And it breaks down, and when it breaks down, it gets very, very bad. So that's why we are in favor of election campaigns. That's why we're in favor of democracy. And that's why we are devoting our energies to preserving this precious form of governance in the interests of the progress of our different societies. As I said, I've been involved in election campaigns for a long time, and they have, of course, been changing. But there are some sort of features that are all the same. You try to focus on how to influence the behavior of the voters. That's what you do when you're doing campaign. You need to mobilize your own supporters, hopefully have some such. You sometimes need to demotivate your opponents. There are always those. You try to target the message. To some extent, target the message. You can't target too much, because if you target too much, you lose credibility with the others, because they, at some point in time, find out the other messages, and if they are not in conformity with the overall message, you have a credibility problem. And then you try to sort of engage your opponent or opponents. And then in democracy, I think it's always important when conducting an election campaign, hopefully important, I would say, to do it with the awareness of the fact that there's a day after the election. And that any democracy is built on the principle of the losers accepting that they lost. And there is a day thereafter when life goes on. The sun does rise, even the day when you have lost an election. Sometimes that seems difficult to comprehend, but that is the case. And governance must go on. And governance with an amount of consensus among those that are the winners and are the losers. And if a democracy loses that particular quality of broad acceptance of the rules of the game, then of course it is in deep trouble. The change that we've seen and I think Madeleine Albright indicated that, our radio, television, the print media, whatever, have changed the rules of the game. And now internet, social media, which makes possible more direct targeting of the electorate, but also makes possible something that wasn't possible to some extent, but to very limited extent. You can actually do things from far away with completely different motives. You can engage and interfere in an election campaign in a faraway country with motives that are not necessarily geared to the motives that sort of are the primary ones among those that are conducting the election campaigns of that particular country. And that is, of course, what worries us and makes it necessary for people like us gathered here to see what can we do to safeguard the integrity, the quality, the very essence of our democratic election campaigns and systems of governance when we have an age of disinformation, of malinformation, of interference by actors who want to really destabilize our societies for purposes that has nothing to do with the well-being of our citizens, but has everything to do with their particular agendas. So that's going to be the conversation where we have Alessandro Romero, Madrid, although I asked where he was living. He said he's living in the nearby terminal. So I guess he's living at Tegel Airport at the moment. But otherwise, Madrid. And he has, and describe it yourself, a data analytics firm, and has been looking at some of the elections. René Di Resta, Silicon Valley. It's California. It's where they do these strange things that complicate life for all of us. But there are some good things coming out of Silicon Valley as well, and has been looking at these issues as well. And she has another presentation. Start with you.
Good. Should I play? Oh, I think it's not mine.
Oh, I guess I go first.
I think it's you.
Okay.
Well,
Good.
Ladies first.
Go for it.
all right, I'm going to try to stand up. I have a broken foot, but we'll see how this goes. So I'm René Di Resta. I'm here from Data for Democracy. I also am a director of research at a company called New Knowledge. So for about 4 years now, I've studied misinformation. I got my start actually with conspiracy theorists, with pseudoscience conspiracies in particular, the anti-vax movement, some of the anti-GMO narratives. After that, I did some work on ISIS, so the progression into terrorist propaganda. I was an advisor to the State Department in 2015 as we began to see the emergence of the virtual caliphate and the way that ISIS managed to blanket the internet with its content and really build a brand, grow a brand, while Silicon Valley tech companies didn't know what to do about that. Following that, recently I've done a lot of the research on the Russia 2016 interference campaign. So Data for Democracy is a nonpartisan collective. There's about 3,000 of whom probably I'd say 800 are active in any given month. That's kind of a little glimpse into our Slack there. And what you'll notice is we don't just work on disinformation related to elections, but we also touch on a number of other areas. But I wanted to, I guess it's helpful that I'm starting, because I think my counterpart's presenting a case study. I'm going to talk a little bit about a framework, which is how do we think about the different types of actors that are manipulating elections? A lot of the conversations that we're having treat this problem as if it's monolithic. There's actually kind of a matrix of actors and tactics. And so one of the things that we look at are who are the types of actors that target elections. So perhaps the best known are the foreign state actors interfering in other countries. That's because of election 2016 and the Russia story. That's gotten a ton of press. That's really done more, unfortunately, to raise awareness of the problem than anything that we'd talked about in years prior. You have domestic ideologues. So these are extremely partisan niche communities that use artificial amplification in particular to kind of promote a narrative that manufacturing consensus is the phrase that we like to use, that make themselves look larger than they actually are. We look at political parties targeting their own people. That's something you see a little bit more in more authoritarian countries, but it is a common tactic. And then we look at economically motivated spammers who piggyback on elections, either to sell merch or to commit ad fraud or a number of other different kind of myriad ways, but economically motivated spammers. So there are a couple, so you've got these sort of 4 actors, and then we're going to talk about 5 goals. So not all tactics are deployed with the same end. Voter suppression, I'm speaking primarily as someone from the US here, but voter suppression is something that we see quite a bit. When we think about tactics for this, we think about things like fake events created on Facebook to misdirect people away from their polling place, information campaigns claiming that you can just tweet your vote. We look then at voter intimidation, another tactic. This is where harassment intersects with disinformation. The idea that you can silence particular voices or deprecate a particular point of view by making it extremely hostile for people who hold that particular point of view to be on a social platform. Voter manipulation, that's a little bit more of creating false narratives around a candidate, perhaps. A great example would be the US special election in Alabama. Recently, after November 2016, we had a special election for an Alabama Senate seat, and we saw an extraordinary amount of misinformation related to allegations of sexual misconduct by one of the candidates. And then there was this interesting dynamic in which bots began to claim that the women accusing this man of misconduct were liars. So there was the attempt to create confusion. Exerting influence, that's sometimes directly political, but actually often policy related. So some of the areas where we're seeing that right now are things like anti-fracking bots created by states that have vested oil interests, for example. So ways to try to shift popular opinion on policy, or ways to shift the Overton window, which indirectly impacts elections by making candidates seem more or less palatable as a function of the policies that they hold. And then creating societal divisions. And that's what we saw most common in the Russia Facebook content targeting US voters, which was largely manipulating us based on unfortunate real social tensions around things like immigration and race and LGBT communities and other sort of social divisions that exist that they simply chose to exploit. Because there are, there's this matrix of goals and bad actors, what that means is that there's really no one-size-fits-all solution to this problem. So the types of tactics that social platforms are putting in place that will have an impact on spammers will not have an impact on state intelligence services, as an example. Requiring ID verification to run an ad is going to stop some kind of middling people who can't forge IDs. It's not really going to do anything to stop a state intelligence service, as one example. So one of the things that we think about a lot at New Knowledge and Data for Democracy is what are the solutions that have the greatest possible impact. We involve ourselves in policy conversations. So in the longer term, we talk about regulation, which in the US is going to take a couple of years, but the ball is rolling, and I'm happy to talk about that. But in the shorter term, particularly since we have our own elections coming up this year in 2018, the midterms, we talk about collaboration. And we think about collaboration in a couple different ways. We believe that monitoring and detection is the best possible way to shed light on the problem. We believe that quantitative analysis is absolutely critical because it's not just an analysis of the narratives, it's also an analysis of who is pushing them, the depth at which they're reaching their audience, the spread at which they disperse around all of the social platforms. We look at disinformation as a systemic problem. We try to quantify it systemically, and we try to then inform the public, work with the platforms, and facilitate information sharing, the public-private partnerships that we've been hearing so much about. And this is sort of a motto that's actually quite common in DC, in the US Digital Service, which I had the pleasure of volunteering for a bit around the ISIS work. And it's the kind of culture that we try to create at Data for Democracy, which is that digital Sherlocks is the term that we use here, but people have the ability to make an impact, and so we are really calling upon those of us who have skills for quantitative analysis or aptitude in policy to really get involved. And that's that.
That's mine. Should I go?
Yep.
Good.
Absolutely.
Thank you very much. Quick introduction. Alto Data Analytics, we are a big data analytics company. We focus on the public sphere. Everything you will see is based on our own software and visualization, and we mine sources from 125 different countries, from dark web to social media, and we basically create actionable insights on the basis of data. What I'm going to be talking today is, and I think it fits very nice with your presentation, is the fragility of truth, and how, in a way, disinformation is taking advantage of that fragility of truth, how this is affecting democracy. And we have been talking a lot about democracy in the last presentations, but we see more and more through our work that it's also affecting businesses and it's also affecting people. We see disinformation campaigns with the intention of creating a business damage or to create a damage of the reputation of an individual. I was in DC last year, and I went out of a taxi, and I saw this ad that I want to share with you. Stuck in traffic, lost an election, blame it on us. This was an outdoor campaign by RT. Some of you are smiling. I'm sure that you saw it also. And it really, I took it to the office, and it really made us think, what's going on. And at the end of the day, what's clear is that we are under attack. And truth-telling institutions are under attack, the media, the academia. The scientific method, trust based on verification, it's under attack. And at the end of the day, what is under attack is actually the enlightenment that is under attack. I'm an engineer, and for me, one of the few things that I learned, because I really never work as an engineer, but one of the things that I learned is in engineering is fundamental that you define your project, your problem correctly. So that's why, whoops, it got to stop.
You want this one?
Maybe this one? Yeah. So the problem definition is fundamental. And this is the definition of the problem that I think we're facing. At the end of the day, we are in a world in which the possibilities of exploiting asymmetric information leads to incentives to create asymmetric information. I think that's the best definition we have been able to come up with. And I want to highlight a couple of things here. Possibilities and incentives. If we want to fix this issue, if we want to limit the impact of this information, not only we need to define clearly what the problem is, but also we need to identify what are the actions to either reduce the possibilities or at least understand the possibilities, but also create the right incentives so asymmetric information is not created. And that's what we do. At Alto, basically, we focus on understanding, assessing asymmetric information impact. We do it with a little bit of a style because we believe data is beautiful. And I want to share with you actually one case study of how this information campaign works. So what you have here is a subset. So one of the largest communities of public conversation in Italy that is clustering conversation about the issue of immigration 12 months before the elections this year. what our technology and our methodology enable us is to basically understand how people will be connecting to each other, how they will be distributing or redistributing information, how, in a way, will be spreading fake news or they will be spreading real news. And what you see, the nodes that you see there are basically authors. Here you see there are more than 1 million messages, and the larger the size of the bubble, the most relevant, the more structurally relevant that author is. We're able to cluster them. So the more interactions, the more the intensity, the higher the intensity of the interactions between the different actors, that gives an idea of to which cluster they belong. And then we can analyze them. We can understand how the dynamics are being created. What you see here is that we identify 4 main communities. There was an anti-immigration cluster, so community 2 and 4, basically, against immigration or creating doubts about the NGNOs. And there was a pro-immigration community, much more organic. You see the shape of the communities is very relevant, and what is adjacent to each other is also very relevant. There was also a small religious community based on their values that were in favor of immigration. This enabled us to find weird things. So for example, 18,000 actors created almost 500,000 messages versus 35,000 authors, so almost double, half of the activity. So there's already an indication that in this community we have a certain level of automation. And one of the things we do, which we believe is important, because everything is interconnected, is we take, let me just go back one. We take the most relevant nodes within the networks, and we basically open up every single piece of content they share. What we basically see here are the top 100 domains, and they're linked to each other when one author or several authors share those 2 domains. Now, here what you have is the ability then, as you know to which community the authors belong, to map what are the narratives and the sources of the narratives that are feeding each of the communities. And you see here the anti-immigration community and the pro-immigration community with very different profiles, some of them with higher activity and variety in terms of content share. And on the basis of that, we can pinpoint, for example, foreign media. So we see, for example, Huffington Post, which was actually the most relevant one, is in between both communities. So it was shared in between both communities. We see, for example, The Guardian, which was very much in the pro-immigration community, and we see RT and Sputnik within the anti-immigration community. Here you have some examples of the content that Sputnik was sharing. So this one in red is outside the period of analysis, but it's very much in line from an editorial perspective where they're pushing. They were saying basically that news media in the UK are warning of potential tribalization of the Italian territory. The question you might have now is, fine, did they really get what they wanted? How effective were they with this piece of content or with these pieces of content, and how well did they propagate? So let me show you. This is how it looked like. So 90.4% of the distribution of content coming from these sites, that at least distributed or touched a piece of content from these sites, was concentrated in the anti-immigration communities. So very much in line with the previous presentation, this is a clear example in which content was fed and injected in order to create a higher level of polarization and keep the polarization very high months ahead of the elections. Now, the second question you might have is, okay, fine, but how influential were the nodes that were distributing that content? Yeah, pretty influential. So the top 15 most influential users touching at least one piece of content from RT and Sputnik were at the core of the anti-immigration network. And who are the likely bots or the key bots? So where are the most active users distributing the content? Again, in the anti-immigration community. So, I want to finish with a positive note. I love this event. This is my first year here. I hope that you guys keep on inviting me. And I love it because I think that we need to fight this in a holistic way. This is not about engineers or sociologists or journalists. I think we need to all work together Because what is at stake is the fragility of truth, and it can be protected. We believe that understanding the possibilities, the incentives, understanding the impact is the only way to achieve resilience. Is the only way to really at least limit the impact of disinformation. Thank you very much.
Thanks very much. That sort of highlights a good example from the Italian election. It clearly showed that social media was very important, and the activities on social media in mobilizing a particular sentiment that was there. It's also important to recognize that the sentiment was there. External actors or disinformation can seldom, they can't ignite the fire, but they can throw a lot of fuel on that particular fire. And those others, like us, our task is to deal with that. We will have to, in all of the election campaigns, we have sort of Turkey coming up on Sunday, that's a complicated one. We have Mexico coming up next weekend. We have X numbers of other election campaigns. There are elections all over the world all the time, as we know. Our task is, of course, to make certain that facts are available online. That is not only the activity on the other side, that there is activity on our side, that those that go on social media, young people, but also others, increasingly also others, that they have access not only to the inflammatory, negative, disruptive information, but also there's the positive, truthful, correct information available. And that, I think, is the core long term. We can complain about disinformation, we should, and see how you counter it. But essentially, you counter misinformation with information. You counter lies with truth. And that is the key to doing it. I didn't do a presentation. One thing I recommend to you, I'm also on a board of a thing in the US called the RAND Corporation, big think tank or whatever we call it. And we've done a major study on the US, which is called Truth Decay. The decline of facts-based debate and analysis in the US political debate over a longer period of time. You can find it if you go to rand.org, and you find that particular study. And what we are going to do now is to try to see if that particular analysis has the same relevance if you take it to other political cultures and environments, and most probably, sorry to say, it has. But that's sort of a more academic or semi-academic approach to trying to approach the problem that is the decay of truth and facts-based analysis and decision-making in our respective democracies, slightly broader than what we are discussing here. Any further comments?
I like your presentation a lot. The way we normally structure also the solutions and how we see things, and maybe there will be some questions around that, is from a kind of pure supply and demand perspective. So, on the supply side of things, we talk about, or you talk about regulation, we talk about, in a way, the media, the role of the media. But I think there is also work to be done on the demand side of things. So the users, the individuals. And I think that debate is still very, very early. There is fake news already in that debate. Some of the analysis that we do are, actually a troll when we publish them. But I think we all need to, in the industry, have a serious debate about things like access to the data. And we are in a moment in that the companies that own the data, some of them have very different models. Some of them have very open models, some of them have closing or about to be closed models. And they're sitting on data that is a cost of opportunity for the humanity, not only for the democracies we live in. So I'm sure that in the next months to come, we will need to have, as societies, a discussion about that.
We think about demand as well, but the one thing that I would say to push back against that, and the idea that what we just need are more facts, is that very oftentimes, once somebody has been indoctrinated into a particular community, we see this very commonly with pseudoscience and conspiracy theorists. The problem is not one of facts, the problem is one of trusted sources. And another thing that we see that I think is impossible to get away from is the culpability of the social platforms in actively recommending and surfacing this content. And that's because it is sensational, it is highly polarizing, it is emotionally resonant, and it does way better than anything factual. And the recommendation engines, as they are conditioned to keep people on site and to monetize people for longer, the platform incentive is actually to surface content that is engaging. And so once someone has been indoctrinated into a particular type of community, the recommendation engines reinforce that feedback loop. Trending algorithms reinforce these sorts of polarization in communities. They're easily gamed. Search algorithms have a big problem with what we call keyword voids, where a niche community can really own a keyword, and when someone searches for it, they're only going to find the information that that community wants them to see. So you create this keyword, you put it out on social platforms, get it trending. When someone goes and Googles it, they find your content. They engage with your content long enough, and you can retarget them on Facebook, for example, or elsewhere. So there's a lot. The issue is this is a systemic problem, but there are a few core areas, curatorial algorithms like search, trending, and recommendation engines, that really facilitate it. And no amount of adding in extra facts is going to change the way that the system pushes people in particular directions.
No, it's not. But the effect that you have, the primary effect that you have of this particular platform is, of course, that they very much preach to the converted. I mean, if you are converted to a particular opinion, that's reinforced, and you get increasingly militant. On both sides, you might argue, that was shown by your graphs, although that was one side that was far more active, automated to some extent, than the other side. Then politics is, of course, very much a battle for the middle ground.
Yep.
It is what we normally call the swing voters. Those that are they are in between these particular positions, they are searching for something. And the key question is, of course, in any battle to reach those. And to reach those, I would argue, from my experience, you should have a message that isn't necessarily too polarizing. The message that really makes your own people even more convinced of the anti-immigration or the pro-immigration message isn't necessarily the message that resonates with the swing voters. And here I do believe, it might be that I'm the last believer in good politics, I do believe that sort of a facts-based, fairly moderate in that sense argument, not too polarizing, can be very important in mobilizing the swing part of the electorate that normally decides where things end up. Are the social platforms good for that? Yeah, sometimes.
I think in the US we also have a slightly different system because we have the primaries.
True.
Yeah, and so for us it's that initial, who are you going to turn out in a very low turnout election, and that's where the power of really going hard for your niche is how we start to see things like a man who owns a brothel in Vegas just ousted an incumbent, riding a low turnout wave of populism that was, quite actively amplified on social media. Now you, yes.
No, that's true. The American election system makes it different with the primaries. Yeah.
I mean, I think your point is the point you mentioned is a very strong one. I really think the issue is even bigger if we think that not all the platforms are owned by the same agents. So YouTube might be under attack because their algorithm might be game and they don't even understand or know, because basically the users are coming from another platform, and just because of the retargeting, the algorithms behind are playing these videos that someone else was training to be played in case someone was reaching the platform. So yeah, I think what I believe it's important at the moment, in my opinion, is to raise awareness about these things, to make people aware that they need to be more critical in their thinking, which I think has a big problem, which is people are lazy. I'm the one, and so to train people in a kind of critical thinking, it's going to take time, and the impact is really immediate. And the other issue that I see is, you know, I see that more and more what we do is approaching the cybersecurity space.
Yeah.
And I like to put this this example. You know, when I talk to really cybersecurity guys, they always talk about, you know, we have the backup system, and if we are attacked, you know, our backup recovery time is reduced. But I wonder, you know, if our societies are attacked, if the social fabric is hacked and is polarized, where is the backup? How long does it take to really bring back society into an unpolarized, you know, dynamic? And I think this is one of the largest issues we face as a society. And I think, you know, in line with what you're saying, that fueling those divisions and polarizations, it's complicated and it's sophisticated and it's becoming more sophisticated, but it's one way. I've not figured out what is the way back.
I agree that is quite a problem. I mean, the level of polarization, that sort of it goes up, and governance of a society, if the level of polarization goes too high, governance becomes difficult.
Exactly.
So that's sort of the nature of democracy, as I said earlier. You need to understand that you can win elections, but you need also to understand that you can lose elections, and losing elections ain't the end of the world or the end of life. There's another election coming, you might win that particular one. But if the polarization goes high, that becomes different. Another difference, think about it with the US system that we don't have in Europe. You have a tradition of commercials on television and attack ads.
Yep.
And they are evil. I mean, apart from, now we talk about social media.
Yep.
But if you go to the old media,
Yes.
and there are a couple of sort of well-known examples of extremely effective attack campaigns on television that have been killing people. Well, not literally, but politically in the US. That doesn't hardly exist in Europe. Might be in other countries. I mean, look, the Turkish election campaign probably has elements of it at the moment. Mexican, I don't know. Other parts of the world, uncertain.
They go viral on social media. I worked one of the special elections. I like to volunteer where I can to run digital campaigns to see how the ad platforms, what the data looks like with real money and real stakes. And one of the things that we saw was just the cost per impression for an attack ad was so much lower. You're really incentivized to do this if you're a campaign because you have a finite advertising budget. This is speaking within the US. I've never done this for a European campaign, but this is what people share. They share things that make them, you know, this righteous indignation. They share things that make them feel riled up. They're not sharing a bland video of, you know, the candidate with his kids in a park. They're sharing the attack ads, which means that the cost for organic amplification is much the cost for the campaign is much lower because the organic amplification hits. This was the thing that was so, you know, dishonest about Facebook's initial statement with regard to it was only $100,000 worth of ads in the US, which was that, yes, it was the ad impressions were quite small. The organic reach of that content was extraordinary.
I agree. It's not sort of the video of kissing babies, to take some sort of classical campaign tactics, that goes viral. It is if you do something else with the babies, it's not recommended, by the way, that goes viral. And of course, social media has had the impact that if you take the sort of classical commercial attack campaigns in the US, now you can, with, as you said, fairly limited amount of money, you can spread them around in a way that you couldn't before. And that means that that particular practice is now, to some extent at least, appearing on the European scene and wherever else. India, Philippines is an extremely good example of how we can have social media being very active in extremely polarizing campaigns.
There were some questions, right? But they disappear, I think.
Oh, because we're getting the...
We don't see anything up here, you see? someone back there, I think.
Yeah, thanks for your presentation and your feedback on this. I had a question about, there's a lot of discussion here around social media, and it indeed has a major role to play. But what I'm missing in this discussion is the role of the regular media and the way they also put focus on people like Trump and others and sensationalizing this. What's the role and reflection on that in this wider debate?
I think that's. Can I take that one? I think that's it's a very good point. So, I mean, a big trend that we see in our analysis is that, for example, we're going to release some information about the Mexican elections next week. A big difference between the two, two main candidates, is the role of traditional media versus emerging new media. In one of the candidates, the majority of the content that is distributed within those in his community, it's from purely digital media. Some of this media is relatively new, created or domains registered in 2016, while the other candidate, almost the same percentage, is coming from traditional media. So, at the end of the day, what we see is that there is, this idea that the, frames and the public opinion was, kind of created from, the elites and the governments through the media. That model is broken, and it's broken because basically the masses have now multiple digital touch points, bidirectional, and that cannot be influenced by the elites. So the whole ecosystem is changed. One of the first things we look at when we analyze, any campaign, any disinformation campaign, is the media mix, because that's a very good indication to which point, there any coordinated action, and also, the potential of that campaign to succeed.
Let me just make the comment. We had one more question, I think, somewhere. On classical media, I would argue that still television is bloody powerful. Take one concrete country, Russia. In Russia, the regime controls television, absolutely. But internet is fairly free in Russia. The opposition is very effective on primarily YouTube and social media, the VK. But since the regime controls television, it controls the rural, elderly part of the electorate, which dominates over the younger, urban, more modern, and they win elections. So for sorry to say to all of you, we're all active in social media, but don't neglect the old ones, particularly television. Was there someone?
There.
Yeah, sorry.
Since you mentioned demographic differences.
Yeah.
Thank you. Since you mentioned demographic differences, what is then an effective way to more activate that younger generation that's on YouTube, or is it more just a question of waiting for those other people to die?
That will happen.
I can answer that maybe a little bit in the US. We see a fundamental rethinking in the resourceability required to win a race, actually. We think that this actually fundamentally opens up. In the US, we have this thing called the Partisan Voter Index, the PVI, and our districts are quantified by a spread. This is a Republican plus 14 district, Republican plus 10, et cetera. One of the things that we've seen is there is an ability to reach people with much more targeted precision ads, events pushed to the phone, text messages. There's a lot of shifting in that regard. One thing we also see actually is I believe there's studies out quantifying now that older people on social media are more likely to fall victim to misinformation. Mm-hmm. So there is also much more thinking about how can we reach younger people with a message, if we're going to try to. Unfortunately, spend is you can't have this conversation without talking about spend, because there's this asymmetry of passion where most of the time the amplification of the false narrative, I see this with vaccines all the time, the anti-vaxxers are just out there. You have these dedicated truthers who are absolutely committed to pushing misinformation and lies. To counter that, you need to be counter-spending. That's the thing that's so frustrating when we deal with the platforms where we say, like, the system is actually very much stacked against the restoration of like a shared epistemology and true narratives. But we do hope that by reaching younger districts, and we can change the playing field a little bit.
Thank you. And the task of all of us is, of course, to rescue democracy from the challenges that are there. And continuing to what Dan Fried said when he concluded the last session, I belong to those that are fairly optimistic. There was, go back some years in time, there was a belief that the internet was going to bring democracy and enlightenment and whatever. That might have been slightly naive. Now there is the conventional wisdom that is all favoring the authoritarian regimes. I think that's equally naive. I do believe that truth is somewhere in between, and I do believe that there is more truth in what was the previous conventional wisdom than in this one. I think the authoritarian regimes will have a far bigger problem ahead than the democratic regimes. Thank you.
Thank you.
Welcome to the next. Are we live? Are we audible? Yep, jolly good. Welcome to the next table game, which is Bot Spot, spotting bots. To be upfront about this one, this is a somewhat unusual table game. We haven't tried this format before. Normally, when we're teaching people to bot spots, we have them on paper. We print out the profile and we give it to them. This time, we've actually got some bots for you in the wild. We've got some live bots for you guys to play with and to experiment on. It's kind of like vivisection on botnets. The trick with this, each table which wants to play the game will need to have access to the app and to be logged into a Twitter account. Because these are not bots in your envelopes. These are going to be bots on your screen because they're still out there and they're still tweeting. So we are going to let you get hands-on live botnets. So while we're introducing this, can you make sure that each table has access to the app and is logged into a Twitter account? We won't be tweeting. You're just going to be looking, but we need to have those things set up. While you're doing that, a very brief couple of words of introduction. We're doing a lot of work on the Mexican election at the moment. And the question we're getting asked most often is this a bot? There's huge interest in bots. There's huge interest in botnets. There's not a whole lot of expertise in what they are. The point of this game is to let you dip your toes into the seething sea of bots and come out safely. Okay? Very, very briefly, in terms of definitions, there are all kinds of bots. There are malevolent bots. There are benign bots. It's a really complicated subject. When we're talking about bots, we are talking about social media accounts which are being run by an algorithm rather than a human being. The difference between a real Twitter account and a fake Twitter account is there's a real human being at the Twitter account keyboard. On the real one, there is no keyboard on the fake one. It's just an algorithm. That means that basically, for our purposes, a bot on social media is a social media account which is being run by autopilot. You switch it on, you let it go, and it flies. That basically means in turn that what it's going to do, it'll retweet things, it'll post, it'll like things, and it will follow accounts. It won't normally post its own content. So rule number one of bot spotting, if you are having an argument with it, it is probably not a bot. Okay? If we can spread that word, it would save about 95% of the trash talk about bots on the internet. So this would be a good start. Okay? So that's bots. The second most common question we get about Mexico is where are the botnets? So Donara is going to talk to you about botnets.
So as the name suggests, a botnet is a network of hundreds or thousands of bots. On their own, a single bot doesn't really have or can have any impact on the information environment or a social media network. But as a network, they can and have in the past impacted the trending content that we are seeing and the algorithms behind the social media companies and pages. Another interesting thing to think about is that there are two types of botnets. There are the commercial botnets and the political botnets. Most of the time in the media, we hear about the political botnets, but they are not the majority of bots. The majority of bots are commercial bots whose main purpose is to promote products for financial gain. And that can range from the new Huawei phone to escort services in Turkey. And then we have the political botnets, whose main goal is to promote political ideas, agendas, candidates, and campaigns. And they are doing it for the political gain. The difference between the two is that they have different goals and different objectives. But what we have seen is that commercial botnets have and could be used for political purposes. So Ben and I recently did some work on the botnets targeting the Mexican elections, and we found that quite a few of them were commercial botnets hired for the purpose of promoting content that was political. Another caveat is that bots target algorithms, not people. As Ben said, if a botnet is arguing with you, it's not a botnet. It's not a bot. So one thing to remember is that bots will rarely target you. What they do instead is they target algorithms. An algorithmically run account cannot change your opinion or mind about something. But what it can do is it can make a content or subject or a person seem more important or more popular than they really are.
So what we're going to do in this table game, rather than telling you loads and loads and loads and loads of things about bots and then giving you 2 seconds to actually look at them, we've got some nicely caged botnets for you to actually look at. And they are bots, so you know they're bots, so you can have a look at them and actually experiment with some of the criteria of what bots are, so you can get a feel yourselves for what a real live botnet in the wild actually looks like. Just as, for those who haven't done any bot spotting before, welcome to the insane world. Your lives will never be the same again. You are going to lose hours of your lives just tracking down botnets, because it's just, you do. There are at least a dozen different clues which can tell you what a bot is, and we'll put them up on the screen a bit later. I'm just going to tell you 3 of them now. These are the 3 A's of bot spotting. We've had the D's, we've had the C's. This is the 3 A's of bot spotting. This is a useful rule of thumb which can help you quickly spot a bot without having to use an algorithm to do it. The 3 A's are activity, anonymity, and amplification. So activity, if you go to the profile page of the account that you're looking at, on the left-hand side, you'll see when it joined Twitter. Hover the mouse over that, and you will see exactly what date and time that account was created. At the top of that same page, you'll see the number of tweets and likes that it has posted. So you add together the tweets and the likes, and you divide it by the number of days that that account has been in existence, and you can see the average number of times per day that that account has posted. If the average is like 2 or 3, it's not suspicious. It may be a bot, but it's a very low volume bot. If the average is 200 or 300, you start thinking there's something dodgy about that account. If the average is over 1,200, which I've seen in some bots, then you really start getting suspicious. One factor is never enough. There are people out there who spend all day, every day on Twitter and post hundreds of times a day. But if you find an account which is posting hundreds of times a day, that's your first warning signal. So that's the first A, which is activity. The second A is anonymity. The difference between an account run by a human and an account run by a bot is humans have lives and personalities. Bots don't. So look at anything in the account which gives it a personality. Does it even have a profile picture, or is it just an empty space? Does it have a real name? Or is the handle just a scramble of letters and numbers? Or is the handle obviously written by somebody who's getting bored at their keyboard and going diddlum, diddlum, diddlum? I found a bot once whose name was ASD, ASD, ASD. Look at your keyboards. First 3 letters on the left-hand side, in the middle row. This was a bot creator going, I'm bored, ching, 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 name done. That's not a real name. If it has a profile picture, is it a real person, or is it Scarlett Johansson? I mean, she's a real person, but she doesn't have 1,000 Twitter accounts, all of which are posting in Arabic about local politics. Okay? So anonymity. Is there anything which tells you there's a real person behind this account? So activity and anonymity. The most important of the three, amplification. Remember what we said? Bots will amplify other people's posts. They will retweet, they will like, they will follow. They won't generally post their own content unless they're doing like a scraped share from YouTube or a website where the words in the post are going to be the same as the headline they're sharing. So click on the tweets, the tweets and replies bit when you're looking at the profile. Always click on tweets and replies so you don't miss anything, and then just scroll down the list. See if there are any posts there which look like they were actually authored. If you find that your eyeballs are melting because you've been looking at retweets for 5 minutes non-stop, and there is no authored content among it, then that's bot-like behavior. Caveat for the journalists in the room. If you think you found a bot, and you're going to write about it, and you're going to name it, do not say, this is a bot. Say, this shows bot-like behavior, because the second you publish on it, the bot herd is going to turn off the algorithm and start tweeting at you from that account saying, I'm not a bot, how dare you call me a bot? If you've called it a bot, then it gets tricky. If you said, well, it's bot-like behavior, you can reply, maybe you're not a bot, but you posted 2,400 tweets in the last 45 minutes. That's bot-like. Game over. Okay? What we're going to do in this game, 3 A's, activity, anonymity, amplification. Useful rule of thumb. What we have here, and what you have in the app, you have 2 links. Each one is to a tweet that we know has been targeted by bots. This is just to illustrate what they were. This one was a post by the Atlantic Council last year when we got hit by a mega botnet which was trying to silence us, trying to intimidate us. We had 106,000 retweets on that account, on that tweet at one point, which meant we had 106,000 notifications. It was like a DDoS attack. The thing is, Twitter has hoovered up most of those, but if you've never done bot spotting before, open that tweet and click on the likes and have a look at the likes. This is a nice, easy, really obvious botnet. You should be able to spot that by eyeball. Just look at the accounts. There's a couple of little mini botnets in there. So if you're not very confident on bot spotting, start off by looking at those accounts and just seeing what can you deduce about the network. How were the usernames made? Is there a pattern? Does that pattern tell you anything? What kind of content are they producing? Okay? So if you're not very confident, start off by looking at the likes on that Atlantic Council post and see what you come up with. These are real live bots. You can just look at them, see what they do. The next post is this one, which I discovered because the fools tagged me in it and then used 14,000 bots to amplify it. So I had 14,000 notifications of this thing over a space of a couple of months. I finally thought, you know what, thank you for delivering me a botnet on a plate. I will now analyze it. So all the initial retweets got hoovered up, but these ones didn't. The interesting thing with this particular post is that there are large numbers of bots doing the retweeting. There are also bots doing the likes. But they're actually looking like they're from different botnets. So here, have a look at the tweets, at the retweets, have a look at the likes, and compare the accounts. And see, can you divide them into different botnets? Are there different kinds of pattern going on? Are some bots all sharing the same content, and other bots sharing a different similar set of content? So you've got 2 different parallel streams of botnets that you can look at. I would warn you, particularly on this one, some of these bots, at some of the time, I have seen sharing content which is pretty toxic. There's some quite nasty stuff out there, and I'm afraid that is the downside of bot spotting. You will see some posts that you think, I wish I hadn't seen that. I apologize for that if some of those are in this stream. It does happen. For those of you who are doing the bot spotting regularly, a really important thing to think about, like Alexa said yesterday, pastoral care. Make sure that whoever your bot researcher is, you're looking after them. You're giving them downtime, because they might see some pretty unpleasant stuff. So apologies if there is any stuff in that stream right now, just be aware. If you feel like you've done it all before with bots, and you are comfortable spotting bots, then wonderful, come and work for us. But then there's another little challenge. Again, on this Atlantic Council one, at one point it had 106,000 retweets. Then Twitter spotted 105,000 bots in the chain and took them all out, which was a good day. But as I checked it this morning, there are still some bots in the mix. So if you want a bit more of a challenge, look at the retweets on that Atlantic Council tweet and try and work out which ones are the humans and which ones are the bots, because there's a bit of both, if you feel like a challenge. We will give you 10 minutes to do that. You've got all the different criteria by which you can spot a bot on paper on the tables. We will be circulating to help if need be. 10 minutes, and then we'll come back and we'll have a little chat about what you've seen, which accounts we think are human, which are not, and then we'll go for lunch. So starting now. Not start, there we go. Happy bot spotting.
We have to check the retweets and find which one is the bot.
Well, do you want to do
Yeah.
the most complicated one or the simplest one?
Yeah, well, you need to select just one tweet and then analyze the retweets or likes for that, yeah.
Retweets, but you need to actually log in.
Yeah.
Yeah?
I have the application here.
Yeah.
Hi, is everything clear?
The trickiest one is actually
Yeah.
telling
No
you to-
questions?
Yeah,
Yes.
so look at these different accounts.
On the app, you need to go on our session agenda,
I'll give you a hint. If it doesn't have a
Yeah.
I think certainly last
then
time.
find our...
Start with something
here.
like Tiffany or Evelyn. Yeah, might be a good place to start.
And here are the links. Yeah, no
they're
worries.
they're in the app.
Yes. Whichever you want. So you can. So there are two tweets, and if you go on agenda,
Say you're not asking.
yeah,
for
you click on the game.
the other way around.
Yeah, so you have these
Learn
two
this
links,
is what
so
I
you
know
can
from
either look at the likes or
there's two
retweets
links
of this
in
one or the retweets of that one, and you choose, and then you analyze some of the accounts that look like bots, and then see which of these features you can find, and you know what could help you to identify it. Yeah.
Schellenberg and Atlantic Council. And so the Schellenberg is the one with
Guys doing well?
parallel botnets doing different things.
Yeah.
The Atlantic Council one is the dead easy likes and then the complicated retweets. How to find a what?
All good. Have you got any questions?
Where-
Hi.
who's asking? Yeah. Okay, so
Yep.
if you go to the app,
No worries.
has any of you got the app? Yeah. So go to the app. Go to no, not the Twitter app, the Atlantic Council app. Yeah. Sorry. Yeah, sorry, I should have been clear. Yeah, you go to the sessions agenda. Yeah. You go to this session, which is BotSwap, so scroll down a bit after the break. Table game.
Are you guys doing okay? Is it clear?
It's there.
Easy to
The
find?
Atlantic Council one is either the easy one and the hard one, and the Schellenberg is in the middle.
Yeah.
So that's if you look at the likes on this one, frankly.
Yeah, exactly. So what you want to do
Certainly,
is click on the
it.
different accounts and see
I'll check
what
it.
kind of stuff they're tweeting, see if they are part of a network.
Yeah, scroll. Yeah, look
Yeah,
at the profile.
yeah,
Bing, bing, bing.
yeah. You won't be able to count all of them because you
Right.
can't see all of them. But just yeah, exactly.
So
Yeah.
have a play with those. The hardest one is looking at the retweets on this one because there's a few bots in the mix, but then they're mostly likes. And then the Schellenberg one, you've got two different bot streams
Vad
going
ska
on
säga
at the same
ska?
time. Okay.
Neaišku. Vieną tweetą ir pažiūrėti, kokie accountai tą tweetą retweetino ir ar jie yra botai ar ne. Kiek gali daugiau. Jo. Tai yeah. I'm sorry that you were Lithuanian as well. Yeah, so you pick one of the tweets. I would suggest you start with the
if it's
retweets of the
posting-
Atlantic, with the likes of the Atlantic
the
Council
things.
tweet,
If it's
and then
posting in loads of
and then
different
analyze
random stuff, then it's
who
almost commercial.
retweeted it and look
Unless a beautiful
at their
girl like that
profiles to
speaks
see if
18
they are a
languages,
bot,
are you gonna spend her whole time?
not, and if they are, what kind of
If you've got a
pattern
different
you can
number of
identify
or
to prove
likes
that
on
they are a
different
bot not.
posts,
Yeah, that
don't
one is
forget
also good. Yeah,
go online and you buy
yeah.
retweets or likes, you actually say how many you're buying.
Guys,
you might get a post
doing
with
okay? Is it
100,000
clear?
retweets and then with 100 retweets, well, you've got it's a buy.
Yeah.
So
Wonderful.
So sometimes if it's always like 76 retweets on every post, then you can legitimately say that's probably 76 in that part of the botnet.
Are you doing
But if
alright?
there's a difference in the number of amplifications, it could be that people have paid for different.
Oh,
numbers.
nice, great.
It could be that the bot is reacting to different keywords, and so different combinations of bots will be reacting in on different keywords, and therefore you'll get different numbers. But don't forget, click on tweets and replies, not just tweets, just to make sure that it's actually it's not having sort of steamy chats with people on the other channel.
Are you guys
Not
doing all right?
just
Is it clear? Yeah?
Okay.
Wonderful.
Is that how it works? So if I want to buy a
No.
and I say I want like all keyword searches with 750 in it.
I'm sure they do anyway, but yeah. So I mean, there are various different ways it works depending on where the actual network is set up. But for example, you could say, it can be anything from I want 1,000 retweets on this post, or I want 10,000 extra followers. So some of the bots, I don't remember if they're in this stream, but you'll see bots which have only posted 3 times,
Yes.
but they're following 10,000 accounts. That's a follower bot.
Uh-huh.
And you can go online and say, I want 1,000 extra followers.
You don't have an app?
Yeah, it makes you look more important, right? Or they can say, you can say, I want
Yeah.
500 retweets of this post.
Oh, right.
I
No.
want
The app for
somebody
the
else
event, because the link is there.
Yeah, it doesn't matter if you're
Yeah.
the holder.
Let me.
Okay. Or
You
can
have
say,
the app,
I
right?
want
So yeah, you go on the
this
agenda,
hashtag to trend, go and make it trend, and they will find a combination of bots that will do it.
and
So-
then
so
to our session,
basically, bots are a potential which you can then
and there are.
various ways. But certainly in
link
terms
there.
of the visuals,
Oh,
if
scroll
it's
down.
posting in 18 different languages and it's a beautiful girl, my experience is that
No
the
worries.
girls who speak 18 languages have better things to do than spend their whole day on Twitter.
You can also use
Not
it
that I
on
know
the web
It's like
browser.
They've
Yeah,
got better things.
whichever one you have.
Yeah,
Yeah,
particularly
just
when we're looking
click.
at
Start with
Arabic
maybe
language,
the Atlantic Council one.
alphabets in 17 languages. That's almost I would say
Yeah.
that's a commercial botnet because there's no internal logic linking all the posts. It's just. And it's not even a hashtag thing, right? Because you don't have a hashtag which works in Arabic and
Oh,
Chinese simultaneously.
yeah, no worries. Then just copy the link and send it to yourself,
Yeah, you
or
can- more and more you
type
can
in the
crossover.
keywords
I
from the
tend to
tweet.
suspect
I think it
more
was.
commercial, but their bottom, their foundational purpose is commercial, but then a political party pays for them more than the other
Yeah.
way around. But you could also have a political
No
party
worries.
has its own botnet, needs to make some money, or somebody who's running it needs to make some money and uses it for commerce as well. There's this huge grey area where you can't really say for certain commercial or particular. The other thing you get, I found a hilarious botnet last week, which was it was all beautiful. In fact, if you look at if you look at the
if you
likes
scroll
on
up.
the Schellenberg post,
See 90 tweets.
there's one there whose bio says something like cosplay.
We can see
lover.
when they joined
Scroll down,
on
it's a little half-dressed
on the
girl,
phone. I don't think you can. Yeah,
somewhere down
unfortunately.
there.
Yeah.
That
But you can
particular
see when
bio
they've started
belonged
tweeting if they
to
haven't
a
posted that
botnet
many
where
tweets.
They were
Yeah, but it's not, of
they,
course,
they
as
were
effective.
basically posting sort of girls
Sorry about
in
that.
bikinis and then quotes from Jane Austen.
Yeah.
But the whole point was that in the pinned tweet and in the bio, you had "Come and see me at this link."
Is it clear?
And the link would then lead you
Yeah,
to a paid
wonderful.
pornography site in Russia.
Yeah.
So the whole point of the botnet was
Yeah.
not to
Well, the
sell
key to finding a
retweets or
botnet
likes,
is
but to
identify a pattern
link,
that
and that
has
was
been
how they
used to
made
create a
money.
botnet.
So
So
you get
whether it's
different
similar
variations.
activity,
Yeah, that's
for
the sort
example,
of thing.
similar
Sorry,
retweets,
again, like I
or
said,
similar pattern of speech, or similar
do this at work.
account names. For example, we've
do-
seen
do-
one
do
where
not click
we'll have hamster one, hamster two, hamster three, hamster four,
the way,
and
indeed,
they are all tweeting these exact same
ladies
things.
present,
That's how you
I
can
mean,
tell a botnet.
unless,
Try and look for
but-
patterns,
but
because I
that
can
kind
tell
of
that you are
thing,
doing really well.
the bot
Already, yeah.
itself is not
Well
actually there
done.
to amplify stuff on Twitter. It is to draw people to another platform, and that's
Yeah.
where they make their money. So there's
Yeah.
and I even found one botnet which was masquerading
Exactly, because
as
these
as a-
bots, they go to the highest bidder.
It was masquerading as a Russian
they
botnet,
will,
which was masquerading as a Trump
they will,
botnet. But what it was actually doing was sharing loads of news stories, but it was sharing them through a pay-per-click advertising site.
Because
So it would advertise all these kind of headlines, but they'd put in a URL shortener. You still get the headline, "Oh my God,
Yes.
Hillary Clinton has 3 heads of
And
born in on
isn't
Venus."
it crazy that you can spot it
click
with
on that
your
because why
eyes, and
wouldn't you?
Twitter with
And
spam
instead of
detection
taking you straight to the
algorithms
story, it takes you to
couldn't.
an advertising page, and you've got to click again to get.
Yeah,
to
or
the story.
chooses to ignore it.
So they were purely
sad,
monetizing
yeah.
clicks,
Yeah.
but they were using a botnet to masquerade as Russians masquerading as Trump supporters to do it. Go figure. It's the kind of craziness you get.
Yeah,
Okay.
exactly.
Well, okay.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Yeah, which is a real shame, because they have said that they will take care of it, and they haven't. But they do respond to high pressure. Like when we wrote the article on Malaysian elections, before we wrote it, we told them that these were the 22,000 bots, and they removed 500. Then when we wrote the article and New York Times picked it up and Reuters, they immediately removed all of them. So it kind of shows that they need a lot of public pressure to take action. Yeah.
Journalism has an effect.
Yeah, it does. Yeah, a real effect. Yeah, absolutely.
Straight after this, we're going for lunch. So do you want to catch up?
Yeah,
Seriously.
totally. Oh, sorry.
Yeah.
Okay.
Brilliant.
Have to go.
You would think, or
No, that was just kind of an aide-mémoire. So yeah, yeah, yeah. Good point. Five-second warning. This is your 5-second warning. Not anymore. Okay. Put the bots down. We know they're fascinating, but put the bots down, okay? We've got about 5 minutes for Q&A before we break for lunch, and one of my rules in life is never stand between hungry researchers and their lunch. So we'll just do a quick wrap-up. First of all, who worked on the likes of the Atlantic Council post? Did anybody have a look at that? What kind of feedback did we have on that botnet? Let's just have a show of hands. Do we think it was commercial or political? Commercial? Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely, really commercial. What did you feel about the way that botnet had been created? Was it obvious to the eye or not? The likes of the Atlantic Council post? Yeah? Yeah. Well, absolutely. One of the things I love about that post, I've been tracking that periodically because it's just a good place to find some bots. You can always tell when they're back because you'll get like 6 or 7 accounts in a row, all of which have the same profile picture. And they're all in a row, and they're doing it at the same time. So that's a really, really obvious botnet for visual purposes. The weird thing is, I don't know if you looked at the URLs or the Twitter handles of those particular accounts. Did anybody look at that? Yeah? So what did you see? Exactly. The weird thing about those botnets is that they all actually have the same name, and the only thing that's different at the end is the number, and the number goes up in sequential order. So the fascinating thing with that botnet is you can actually, if you find one of them, go to the URL, delete the last digit, and replace it with the 1 digit higher up in the series, and you'll find another bot in the same series. And so you can actually, just by finding one of those accounts, you can keep going all the way up and down, and you can establish how big the botnet is. The weird thing is that when you do that with that botnet, you will find that about 1/3 of the accounts have already been suspended. About 1/3 are temporarily restricted, so you have to click again to go and see them. And 1/3 are still operational. They all have the same profile picture. They all have a serial name. Clearly, the Twitter algorithm has caught some of them, but it hasn't caught the others. So that's a really weird factor with those ones. Who looks at the Atlantic Council tweet amplification? The Schellenberg tweet. Who looked at the botnets around the Schellenberg tweet? Anybody look at that?
Yeah, here. Wonderful. What did you guys find? What is it, a commercial or a political botnet? Mm-hmm. Yeah. Why would you say that? Exactly. Whatever, whoever pays. Yeah. Excellent. And did you find some Russian names in there as well?
Yes. Mm-hmm.
Did you think they were political Russian bots or commercial Russian bots? You didn't? Oh, right, yeah. Well, we have looked into them, and they appear to be commercial bots. And here comes a side note to journalists in the room. Not all bots who are tweeting in Russian are pro-Kremlin bots, and it's really important to remember that, because for a lot of people in developing countries, the building and sales of bots is a good way to generate some extra income, and marketing companies and businesses are very eager to pay for that kind of service. So a lot of Russians are doing that are running that as a business, and not every bot that has a Russian name or tweets in Russian is a pro-Kremlin bot.
And something else of interest, just as an aside, if you look at the retweets of the Schellenberg account, the very top one is a Russian language faceless one called Anastasia Kuznetsova. If you look at the retweets from that, about 6 or 7 retweets in, you'll suddenly find it's posting a whole load of far-right advertising from the AfD party in Germany. There was a lot of reporting just before the German election about Russian botnets interfering in the German election. We were one of the teams who found them. That's part of that botnet. So the same botnet which is amplifying that weird Schellenberg tweet about a green card was active and being used 3 days before the German election. And that's where you see the crossover directly between commercial bots and election interference. What had happened in that case was the bot herder was a Russian supporter of the AfD and made his botnet available to the AfD for unspecified, and I quote, mutual benefits. So it's kind of foreign interference, but it's not, as far as we know, governmental interference. Last question, who had a look at the tricky one which was telling the difference between the bots and the humans? Anybody going to confess?
Yeah.
Yep. How did that go?
There weren't a lot. There was one, I think, of the third or one, the MAGA profile picture that has a lot of retweets that are also being reposted with by similar accounts.
Yeah. If you look down far enough, you'll find a few faceless ones as well. Tiffany, Evelyn Rivera, Pedro Claubel, Hasso. So,
Not necessarily very active.
right. No, absolutely. And that's the point. Quite a few of these bots haven't actually been active for several months now. But if you're looking, one of the giveaways is if you're looking down the list of retweets or likes, you know, human beings like putting their face on things. If you suddenly find 5 or 6 in a row which have no face, that's when you start thinking. And remember the 3 A's, activity, anonymity, and amplification. If you're not putting your face to it, if it's only a faceless account, some people do that. But if you get half a dozen in a row, you've probably got a botnet. We're going to wrap it up there because we are standing between you and lunch. We need to start back here at 1:10 because one of the VIPs from up top is going to come down and talk to us. So we've got half an hour for lunch. Do check out the Facebook Lounge. Do check out the food. Do go and make contacts and have fun. And we'll be back here at 1:10. Thank you.